welcome to this session of Chinese operas and Chinese 曲艺. So today we're going to talk about the Chinese operas and Chinese 曲艺, which are both very important Chinese performing art forms. So now I just learned where you guys came from. I think it's a good, we have a good combination, right? It's a very diverse group. That's what I'm trying to say. So today we're going to basically go through some of the important art forms in the Chinese culture. I think that are very representative of what the mainstream Chinese culture is, and we're gonna take this time. I think I'm gonna do a little showcase performance also. To tell you what the Chinese bamboo clapper rap is. The Chinese bamboo clapper rap is also a very important form of Chinese 曲艺. That's why I'm dressed in this way. This is more like my gig attire, right? When I'm performing, I dress like this. We just talked about the Chinese language, which belongs to the Sino-Tibetan group, obviously the operas and the Chinese 曲艺 are all performed in Han Chinese, which is the official language of China. And I'm going to talk about, first I'm going to give you guys a quick introduction about Chinese operas, right? Can anyone tell me one form of Chinese opera? Anyone? Name?
Beijing opera?
Yes, it's called Peking opera.
Yeah.
The older form of, the older term of Beijing. So Beijing opera or Peking opera, that's called the Chinese national treasure because that's the predominant or the imperial, used to be the imperial, it was enjoyed by the empires, like the emperors. So it was the imperial, form of Chinese opera. It was, it's still considered the most important form, Peking opera. And also we have other different local operas that are also being celebrated by other groups, right? Say in Shanghai, and then also the Yangtze River Delta region, we have the Yue opera. And also Huju, the hoop opera, right? Hu basically stands for Shanghai. And also in the Henan province, we have Yuju, the Yu opera. And then even within the Yue opera, Yue basically, it's an acronym for the Zhejiang province, right? You guys all know, from a geographic standpoint, Shanghai is basically sandwiched by the Zhejiang province and so also the Jiangsu province.
Yeah.
So the predominant dialect is called the Wu dialect, right? You have the Han Chinese language at the top, and then we have 8 different dialects, right? So how do you define a dialect, right? I mean, all the dialects, they belong to Han Chinese, right? It's just that it's spoken a little differently. So usually it's hard for one person to understand another when they speak different dialects. But in written Chinese, it's exactly the same.
It's the same.
Yeah, that's how you distinguish one dialect from another. So, for example, I speak Mandarin Chinese. I grew up speaking Mandarin Chinese. Mandarin Chinese is considered called Guanhua. That you guys can write that down. It's called Mandarin Chinese, Guanhua. Guanhua, it means the language of the officials, right? And then when you come to Shanghai, the local dialect is called Wuyu, the Wu dialect. So if someone speaks Wu dialect to someone who speaks Mandarin Chinese or Guanhua, right? That person would not be able to understand, right? But there are terms that that can be understood by both parties, but usually it's hard for people who speak different dialects to be able to communicate with each other. But since everyone understands Guanhua these days, right? Guanhua is the official language, right, or Mandarin Chinese. These days, the official term is called 普通话. But from a linguistic standpoint, it's called Guanhua. You have Beijing Guanhua, which is Peking Mandarin Chinese, and then you have, say, 交辽 Guanhua, which is another. So within Guanhua, there are very, very different dialects, but then as long as you speak one form of Guanhua, you will be able to understand each other. So Guanhua actually is the dialect spoken by almost all the provinces in the north, and also in Xinjiang, right? So every Han Chinese or everyone who speaks Han Chinese in Xinjiang would be speaking a form of Mandarin Chinese. Yeah. So there are just remember there are 8 different dialects in China. Yeah. So and then that's why it's very important to understand these dialects, because the opera I just mentioned, the Yue opera, is being performed in the Wu dialect, right? And then the Hu opera is also being performed in one form of the Wu dialect, right? But the Peking opera, when they're talking, they're speaking in the Beijing Mandarin Chinese, but when they're singing, it's very hard to identify the lyrics, even for someone who grew up in Beijing. It's very hard for me to understand that because all the tonal differences and also the voices, it's very hard to identify the lyrics. Right? That's why it's losing popularity. It's losing popularity among the younger generation because people cannot understand it, right? And it's very lengthy. It's like, the young people can think, oh, this might be very boring, right? It's like you go to an opera, I mean, the Western opera is still a little different, but in China, what makes the Chinese opera stand out is that the props are very simple. They're not very complex, right? I mean, when they're riding a horse, it can be just like, they can use a broom or something like that, but it's very simple. It's like okay, so you were saying you're riding a horse. You don't really need an actual horse or like a wooden horse or anything. You're like doing this, right? It's like you're actually making certain moves or body moves that would help to create that kind of impression. That's why Chinese operas are very different, but then the makeups are very splendid, right? The face makeups, they're very complex, so that's what makes it very unique. So if you want to learn just one opera, learn the Peking opera, just know that it's the one opera that's being celebrated on a national level because of its popularity during the Qing dynasty, right? The emperors really basically named it, the number one opera of China, because back in the old days, it was like, many different local operas competing for the crown, right? And then Peking opera made it to the top. Also, by absorbing a lot of the characters from, by absorbing a lot of the local opera characters. So if you look at just some of the characters, right, all local operas, they all have the same characters to perform, like a historical character. But the way they sing it or the dialect they use might be very different. So that's called the Chinese operas, right? But then there's also the second part, which is called the Chinese Qi. Qi is more like I'm trying to think of something similar in the Western culture. It's more like a stand-up comedy. Qi has has a comic component. So usually the person is trying to be funny, right? And also you don't need complex makeups, right? I can do Qi this way. I don't need to put on a mask or anything, right? I don't need props or anything. I can just perform like this. So think of it this way, right? The main difference between Chinese operas and Chinese Qi is that in Qi, you are a narrator, right? Think about the Western stand-up comedy. You're a narrator. You're telling a story. You can portray different characters, but you are a narrator first and foremost. But in Chinese operas or any operas, Western operas, you can only play this one character. You cannot change roles. You're not a narrator, right? There is a narrator who's like maybe telling a story in the back, but when you dress like, say, Monkey King, you're like Monkey King. You cannot change. You cannot become, say, King Arthur all of a sudden. No, you cannot, right? But in Chinese Qi is like, the comic, right? You can be, okay, I can portray different characters. It's like Monkey King talking to King Arthur, right? It's like, hey, how are you doing, Monkey King? I'm doing fine, King Arthur. It's like I'm doing this, right? And then, so that's why it's called. That's the main difference. Just remember this, right? Opera, you can only be one character. You're this one character from the start to finish. But when you're doing 曲艺, you play 3 characters at least, because you're a narrator first and foremost. You're always telling a story. You're a storyteller, right? And then, depending on your story, you need to get into different characters. You're like performing. You need to portray different characters, right? If this is like a monologue, you can, okay, maybe I'm just performing Monkey King alone. But usually it involves, like, one conversation involves at least 2 people. So you need to at least portray 2 different characters. Now that's the main difference between Chinese opera and 曲艺. Any questions? Yeah. So yeah, go ahead.
Usually we saw like in the performing arts a person who is wearing different masks, and whenever he acts something, every time he changes mask.
Oh yeah, that's a Chun opera. So the changing face act is actually part of the Chun opera or Chunju, right, from the Sichuan province. Yeah, so that's a little tricky because he's not really changing characters, right? He's like, he's really doing the change face thing, but that's still considered an opera. Yeah, because he's got a facial makeup, right? That's the thing. So that's a part of the Chun opera.
So it's more related to 曲艺.
No, it's not 曲艺.
No,
so,
like it's kind of 曲艺.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's still opera. I understand what you're trying to say, but the thing is that he's not being a storyteller, right? So 曲艺, right? How do you spell 曲艺? Q-U-Y-I, 曲艺, right? So the first character of Chinese operas and the second character will be Chinese 曲艺. Let me give you some examples of 曲艺, right? Crosstalk. Have you guys seen crosstalk?
In a taxi sometimes when you get on
相声,
taxi,
yeah.
and then they play on the radio.
Yeah.
Is that the 曲艺?
Yeah. So if it's like a funny act or like a stand-up comedy, so U.S. stand-up comedy would fall under 曲艺, right? From a Chinese standpoint, from a Chinese view, stand-up comedy is 曲艺 because when you're a comic, when you're a comedian, you get on stage, you tell a joke, right? When you tell a joke, what are you? You are a storyteller first and foremost. Yeah. But in the Chun opera you were talking about, you are changing characters, but then you are really showing people your skills, the techniques.
Yeah.
You're not being a storyteller. So first and foremost, you had to be a storyteller. Okay, be like, hey, I'm here to tell this story. Okay, let me tell you something. Okay, today, like, this guy got into a fight with this guy, and that guy was like, hey, get out of my way. And then the other guy was like, no, you get out of my way. So the way I just did it, that was called Chinese 曲艺, because I'm telling you guys a story. Okay, I'm first, I'm telling you guys, hey, I saw this thing, I saw this accident today, right? Let me tell you, okay, it's really such a mess, okay? And then I'm getting into 2 different characters. And, you see people doing things like that all the time, right? Like telling different jokes, right? Or tell a story. You're being a storyteller.
So you need to change your voice when you're narrating.
Yeah, because you're trying to portray different characters. Sometimes a man and a woman. You need to change your body language. You obviously change your voice, right? Trying to mimic their characters, right? Like, their and then just try to be as dramatic as possible, right? And then so the most popular form of 曲艺 in China. So I just talked about the most popular form of Chinese opera, right, which is Peking opera, and which is not being enjoyed by a lot of the youngsters these days because people cannot understand it, even for someone who's from Beijing. But there is one part of the Chinese Peking opera act that people can understand, which is called 京白. You can write that as 京白, J-I-N-G, and then B-A-I, 京白. 京 is basically the second part of Beijing, right? So it already tells you this is done in the Beijing dialect. Bai is like narration. It's like, people, someone is speaking something in the Beijing dialect, so everyone can understand. So there's usually a part of the Peking opera where someone speaks directly in the Beijing dialect. Only that part can be understood by the young people, right? When you're singing, it's not like a Western pop song where you can pick up lyrics, here and there, but it's very different when you're doing Chinese opera. You had to really, know the script or the lyrics first, right? It's not called lyrics. You had to know the script word by word first, and then after time. So it's more like an acquired taste. If you did not grow up listening to it, you will not be able to appreciate it. So China has that problem, right? Passing down the traditions. Obviously, China is doing that in a very collective effort, right? We're trying to preserve that tradition because we have government-supported programs, trying to pass down the traditions. But if we're just talking about popularity, the popularity is down by a lot because the younger generation is not interested at all, right? But it's very important because it's really, it's considered a high culture, right? And then Qi used to be considered low culture because it's very down to earth. It's more like rap. And later I'm going to show you this clapper rap act. Basically, it's like a Chinese bamboo rap. Yeah. And in that act, you can see me portraying two different characters. So getting back to the question of Qi, the most popular form is called crosstalk. Crosstalk is like two people, two people standing on stage together, one straight guy and one funny guy. The funny guy makes all the jokes, and then the straight guy is being the supporting role, right? That's the most popular form. So it's called 相声 or crosstalk. The term crosstalk basically, you can imagine involves two people, right? Yeah. So, and Japan has something similar, mancai. Yeah, it's kind of similar to mancai in a way, but has a longer history, obviously, the Chinese 相声. It's also dressed in this way, kind of similar, but mine is a little different because I added some Western elements to it, and so the shoulders are very different. These shoulders, like this part, is actually done in a Western way. Yeah, because with the edges and everything. Yeah.
Any color would be okay because I saw the mansai thing. It's like they wear black.
Yeah.
Pink.
Mansai is very different. I'm talking about like the Chinese crosstalk. If I'm here to do Chinese crosstalk, I would not be dressed this way, because this is more like a Western. It's a combination of Western and Chinese. The combination. Yeah, you like it? Yeah, like the pattern.
This kind of.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. So what's that Pakistani like wedding gown like
It's
for
called
guys?
Sherwani.
Sherwani.
Yeah,
The
it's
same in
almost
India,
the
right?
same.
Almost the same in a
Yeah,
way,
almost
right?
the
Kind of
same.
similar in a way, right? It's for weddings, right? And big ceremonies, right?
Yeah, more fancy, but
Yeah.
the design is almost same.
Yeah. So that's the thing, right? It's like, I'm doing this because it kind of it gives it's part of formality. Right? It also gives people an impression that, oh, this person is here to perform, right? He's doing something seriously, he's doing this professionally. That's what I'm trying to. But if I'm here to do like a Western style comedy or like stand-up comedy, I will not be dressed this way because you want to relate to everyone, right? That's the thing. But from a Chinese perspective, the Western stand-up comedy also belongs to Qi, right? So is mancai. Mancai is also considered Qi in China. Yeah. So that's the main difference.
Mansai can also be between two people.
Yeah, mancai is actually done by two people. Yeah.
But two people.
Yeah, it's like mancai is very similar to 相声, but 相声is like one straight guy and one funny guy, right? And then so in the U.S., I always tell like people, that's how 相声or crosstalk is being explained in the Western world. It's very similar to Abbott and Costello's Who's on First. This is like a black and white sort of a TV program back in, I think, the 40s in the United States. It's called Abbott and Costello. So their most famous act or line is called "Who's on first," right? The other person is like, the person's name is HU, who's on first, right? He's asking a question. So who's on first? Yeah, who?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the U.S. equivalent of 相声, right? In China, exactly the same. It's like, one guy's trying to make a joke, the other guy's being serious. So who's on first? Who? Yeah, exactly. Who? Yeah. That kind of stuff.
Asking that, what's your
Yeah.
name? He said, my name is you.
Yeah, my name is you. No, I'm me.
Yeah.
I'm me. No, he's you. Yeah, like Jackie Chan, right? That kind of stuff. So, yeah, that's pretty much what the 相声 or the crosstalk is all about. It's very famous, and you have different comedy clubs in China that are dedicated to performing 相声.